It looks like it's, I know there's delays all over the place. I'm still working with an editor. I still haven't applied your extra credit either, but we are going step by step through this. As you go into the Thanksgiving weekend, don't right make sure that as best as you possibly can enjoy this week, and as we're coming back next week, we're gonna really hit it. And for those of you who are still working with us, really make sure that everything is clear about what the expectations are. For now, let's just finish this, and then we'll go into the Sagebrush State, a separate video. I didn't mean for that video to be as long. I'm really sort of learning. I'm still learning, like, I have no interest in being on YouTube, right? This is just the easiest, most functional way. The WebExes are actually very difficult to like get everything together. And this is the easiest way to know that you're looking at what I'm looking at, right? And I can actually add my face to this, which I might do at the end so you can see me. I'm just not doing it because I look very ill and I don't want it to be distracting. So let's just get into the Affordable Care Act. And then once we get through this, we will do one more video on the Sagebrush State, and we'll be caught up. And then I would love to do a video on marginal utility, an optional video today. And we'll see how my voice is keeping up for that. So it'll be an optional video. I would label it optionally. Everything's a live stream because it actually, I don't know why it works this way, but if I live stream it, don't feel like you have to watch it live. I know I've said that, but it uploads in like a couple hours, or like it moves itself to upload right away. But if I record a video and then I go to upload it, it can corrupt, everything can go wrong. So even though it's a live stream, like, and you're like, why does it keep popping up? He's doing all these live streams today. It actually loads to the system much more easier. And you can hear I'm making verbal mistakes. I mean, all of that's there, but when I'm making videos, there's so many problems it runs into, and this software has so many problems. So live streaming it's a much more functional aspect, and hopefully it will become more clear. Hopefully the video quality is good. I haven't seen anything with that. I am using the classroom computer. I did lock the door because I don't want people around me, but this computer works much more better. I'm going to wipe the entire environment down once I leave, right, just to make sure I'm isolating as much as possible. I avoid people as I can, right? I park away. I don't interact with anyone. But if there's a problem with the quality of the video, you can always look at the file. And the next week, if there's more discussion and we're doing a live stream, I know how to put my face up, like in some other aspects. And so what I really want is like part of this to be my face and part of this to be the slides and then part of this to be the whiteboard. And then I could really explain. It's just setting that up is much more difficult, and it seems to never work. So I'm just doing this so we can catch up. And then individual students, as I'm talking to you, if you're not at the grade that you want to be at, talk to me, and every single one of you has an opportunity to do better. And because this is the only class I'm teaching right now, and because I am done, I am not currently working on any other projects, all of my time is dedicated to you. So if you need something and it's going to take a lot of time, I will work with you. Okay, I know I haven't decided in every video, and this is a lot of videos, so let's get into these three key features. So when we're talking about the ACA, the first part is it's a state-based insurance exchange, right? All that means is that each individual state is setting up its own exchange, right? And some of them use the Medicare.gov if they don't set up their own website. There was a legal battle about that, but each exchange is in the state. Why? Because there are a lot of laws in the United States that require insurance be only in one state. You actually can't sell insurance across, like, even though the companies can be multi-state, each sales group has to be in one state, right? That if you buy insurance in Nevada and then you go and live in California, or when I moved from California to Nevada, I had to buy different insurance because I had AAA through California, and then when I moved to Nevada, it had to be a different company because of state exchanges that you have to have insurance in the state that you're in. So it had to be a state-based insurance because of that. You wanted to have an exchange, right? Because although the public option was the first thing that the Obama administration discussed, it was very clear that if they wanted it to pass, if they wanted it to become law, they needed an exchange that included some other aspects. And so in the state-based exchange, there was this argument that pre-existing exchanges would be fine. I think they should say, yeah. So there were some exchanges that already existed, right? California had an exchange website, but I think all of this is that you were going to use the insurance companies in the ways that worked already, and then eventually became a website that, a number of websites that didn't work at first. It was sort of a whole debacle. The fact that the federal government couldn't design a website did not give a lot of credibility to the fact that they were going to buy insurance. But eventually the exchange started working, and then people got signed up. And now the exchanges are functional, right? And it's just a way for you to buy insurance. And it really doesn't change that dramatically from other websites that people have used, right? You just go and it lists the insurances, and you pick your level and quality of insurance that you want, right? You can pay more for better insurance, but also it lets you look at all of the insurances. And that's one of the things that was really a big feature originally, was that you would go to this one website, and then all of the companies that sell insurance would show you their price listing. And so what this makes it is that it's much more competitive for the insurances. So people who want to buy insurance and who want to buy certain levels of insurance can compare all of the levels, what are their costs, and it starts with just information, that the buyer is informed. The next part was the individual mandate. When it passed in 2010, and as it was going through the courts, there was an individual mandate that it wasn't going to go in effect in the first year, but eventually if you didn't buy insurance, and this is part of the thing about the ACA that was a little more controversial, if you didn't have health insurance, the government was going to charge you a fee every year, whether it be like a $200, $300, whatever it was. But basically, you had to have insurance. As a U.S. citizen, you had to have insurance. And so this eventually loses in the case in 2015 and 2012 and 2015. Although the court upholds the ACA in general, the individual mandate does allow it to. The court eventually removes the individual mandate. Right? You can't be forced to buy a product. So if you want to be uninsured in the United States, that can be your choice. Right now, no one wants to be uninsured, but if they don't have the money, right, that becomes part of it. Now, when you're dealing with that individual mandate and when you're dealing with the state-based exchanges, there was this recognition that you needed certain subsidies, right? The first part was that people had subsidies for their insurance. So some people got lower cost insurance. The other part was that the argument was that many of these people who are not insured are actually eligible for other aspects, Medicaid and CHIP, right? So if you were under 18 and your parents didn't make a certain money, you should have insurance anyways. So part of this exchange was just expanding who should have that non-contributory insurance through Medicaid and CHIP. My apologies. Okay. So they added some subsidies. They also allowed individuals to get the CHIP, and those individuals who were previously not eligible, one of the things was that you could make a little more money, and then your children could be on the CHIP program a little more easier. But reality, it just made sure that individuals who were previously qualified just had a better way to understand and access those aspects, right? And because there was an individual mandate in the initial version of the ACA, many children and many poor people looked to see, well, I don't want to have to pay this individual mandate. What can I do? And many of them found that they were already eligible for Medicaid, right? That they were at a low enough income where they had children that were capable of already be part of those programs under the new expanded rules. Now, in 2014, the Republicans take over the House, right? What is typically the case, what we didn't actually see in what we saw in 2018 is the same we saw in 2014, is when the president is not up for election, usually the party that's opposed to the president, right? The Republicans in 2014 and the Democrats in 2018, they win in Congress, in the House and the Senate. They typically pick up seats. Now, the Democrats have not been doing as well in Congress as expected, based on the sort of cyclical representation. But in 2012 through 2016, Republicans controlled at least one house of Congress. And so they voted to repeal the ACA 62 times. And so they were never able to get enough votes to get it through Congress. And they definitely didn't have enough votes to get it past a veto, right? Because the president was definitely going to vote against a repeal of the act he pushed so hard to get through under the Obama administration, right? Obama was definitely going to push against that. So between 2010 and 2016, Republicans voted 62 times. Most of the time, it was a signaling process. And in 2014 and 2015, when they voted against it again, the argument that they made was that individuals who had gotten elected in 2014 didn't have a chance to vote against it, right? And it became part of the Republican Party's idea that they were against the ACA, and because they were against the ACA, it's sort of an identifying mark. We're going to run a vote to see how many Republicans are going to vote for this to show that they are against the ACA, right? And it wasn't going to change the outcome, but it was a signaling process for Republicans and conservatives. In 2014, you see the first of these concepts that even if you have to provide insurance, one of the things that happens is that corporations have to provide insurance to their full-time employees, that what does it mean that what insurance they have to provide? And this was actually the Hobby Lobby case. And they are what's called a closely held corporation. So those of you who don't know, Hobby Lobby is a company, right? I don't know what they sell. But in Hobby Lobby, the owners are a family, right? It's sort of family owned, right? Loosely family owned. And so it was decided, at the time it was Justice Scalia writing this majority decision, that if you're a closely held corporation, that if your company is closely held and has essentially a family at the helm of that corporate business, then it can be considered closely held, and your religious beliefs can tie to your ownership, right? You own the business, it can tie to your religious beliefs. And so what Hobby Lobby did is they denied providing contraceptive coverage to their employees. So if you're a female and you are if you're a female and you go to your doctor and you want birth control, right, Hobby Lobby was able to say our insurance should not have to cover that. And so that became a court case, right, because individuals who worked for Hobby Lobby wanted more care, they wanted to be covered when they did certain aspects, or they wanted, to have contraceptive coverage in their health insurance that they felt they paid for, right, but the company decided that because it was closely held, that you don't have to provide those aspects. All right, finally, we're going to get into housing. So in the United States, we had, it's changing dramatically over the last 10 years, but we had a high rate of home ownership. This is one of those things about the American society that has changed since like 2008. But still, Americans are more likely to be homeowners than compared to other countries, right? You're more likely to own your home. Whether it has a mortgage or not, that's not the question, but more likely to be homeowners. Right, millennials is the first generation where you see many of them opting out of home ownership, whether because they can't afford it, or because their priorities change, right? It is the first time where home ownership is just not really a priority, but also millennials growing up in a system, if we look at like early 2000s, homeownership was this weird thing, and then house prices dramatically went up as wages did not, right? The housing crisis occur, and then homeownership, getting yourself in a situation where the only thing you can do is live at home because you're what's called cash poor, right? House rich, cash poor, right? It changes the perception, right? But still, relative to other countries, a very high rate of homeownership. By 1975, only 8% of those households are in substandard housing. So 92% of housing in the United States was considered at least at a standard level, right? It had running water, it had hot water, it had basic necessities, right? Not necessities like electricity, but the house itself was at a standard level. Before the turn of the century, there were also a lot of housing projects, right? The projects being a very sort of cultural reference now, but there was a lot of what was considered warehousing the poor, right? Very large, very confined spaces with limited ventilation to put as many families in one building as possible, right? That was one of the problems of the projects, right? That the setup was such that people were very compactly put together. It was very difficult for them to get any space, but also that their quality of living was down because ventilation was poor, air quality was poor, right? You just didn't have as much, the housing didn't really provide for a lot. And then because they were so compacted, right, you know, all things, we know that if you put people too closely living together, the crime rates are typically higher just because it's easier to obscure the crime, right? Not out of any sort of racial or cultural bias, just literally if you put too many poor people together, right, there is a need there that's not being filled, and it's more likely that crime rates will go up, right? Most crime is either violent crime towards intimate partners or, right, crimes of what we consider necessity, where they're robbing, stealing stuff to get food or something like that, right? Big bank robbers are mythologically rare, right? Very, very rare do you see someone who's wealthy bank robbing, right? It's usually out of desperation or need. Not that I'm condoning it, just we know that most people who commit crimes, it's out of, are living in poverty, not caused by poverty, but are living in poverty. Now, what we saw was a lack of affordable rental housing. So all of a sudden, after 2008, the house costs went way up, right? People don't, but there's high unemployment's high, and now there's just nowhere for them to live, and there just wasn't enough rental housing, right? That the cost of rent goes up, right? Because if people stop buying homes and more people go into renting, then the rental market becomes more competitive, and apartment complexes raise their rates because they know that it's harder to find a place to rent. And so the affordable renting housing goes away. What you see is more and more high cost rentals. The cost of renting an apartment between 2008 and 2012 increased like 60%. So the reason why Las Vegas's rents are so high is once they went up, they never went back down. And so what you see is rents in the Las Vegas area, unless you live in North Las Vegas, which has its own sort of economic costs of living, or outside of this Vegas area where costs actually go down quite a bit, right? That you see that affordable housing is sort of disappearing. So in the 1990s, they started what was called Hope 6, right, which is this mixed income units. And so the 90s created this issue where you would have a low-cost house, right? Instead of just saying this whole block is low-cost housing, you would take houses in the middle of other blocks, and you would say this house and this apartment, and some of the apartments, right, 30% of your apartments are going to be low-income apartments. So 30% of the tenants are going to be paying much less in rent, but it's going to be subsidized by the government. And so they would balance those things out, right? That you would have 30% be mixed income. And so it disperses people who have low incomes among different groups, right? And then it's just not having a sort of warehousing effect where you're putting them all together. And we talked about the housing bubble and how damaging that was and how that created that system, right? And now we might not reflect upon that, right? And before COVID, the housing bubble was really the life we were living in going through 2019, right? We were coming out of a recession. We were, finding better options. There was more homes being built, right? You're sort of building back through the recession that was caused by the housing bubble. And now we're probably talking about a recession caused by the pandemic. And because the pandemic affected our lives much more dramatically, it'll probably be the focus of pre and post pandemic life, right? One of these things is generational, right? That my generation was pre and post 9/11, right? Your generation, for those of you who were born in the 2000s who don't have memory of a pre 9/11 life, right? It might be pre and post recession, but if you lived in an economy that it didn't really impact it, right? It's going to be pre and post COVID, right? As you age, you're going to talk about life before COVID and how things are different now and how sanitizers are used for everything and masks are common, right? Because more than likely, masks will continue to be common after the pandemic, right? That a cultural shift has already occurred. So you have this housing bubble. I don't want to spend too much time on this. I know the last video was quite long. I don't want to cut this one short, but the housing bubble was really set up in this deregulation of the mortgage industry, right? Banks and mortgage companies were sort of separated. There's deregulation. I talked about Glass-Steagall. But then what happened is because there wasn't as much regulation, you had what was called predatory lending. And predatory lending is this where I loan you, I can sell you a home and I send you to a lender, and that lender offers you what's called a variable interest rate. And one of the things is that the interest rate, when we first start, in the first year that you own the home, the interest rate is very low. It's like less than 1%. But what will happen is that over time, that interest rate is going to go up. So the cost of you staying in that home is going to go from $800, and then a few years later, it'll be $1,200. So that increase is one thing is okay, as the interest rate goes up, the cost for me to stay in this home is going to be difficult. And that's going to be problematic. That's predatory lending, right? That I'm loaning into it and you can afford it now, but unless you get a better job and more income moving forward, then you won't be able to afford this house in the future. And eventually you'll get foreclosed on. The other part that was part of predatory lending is called a balloon payment. And so as your interest rate's going up, you have to pay more and more each month, which is already a problem if you're just trying to make the monthly rent. But then after about 2 or 3 years, I'm going to expect a balloon payment. And a balloon payment is $5,000, $10,000. And it's due on this date, on a specific date. And as you're getting closer and closer to it, your costs are going up every month, but how are you able to save for that balloon payment? And so the reason why we call it predatory lending is because I'm loaning you a home. I know that you're going to have struggles to pay it back. And because I believe that home's not going to lose much in value, I loan it to you, you pay all of this interest and you pay the mortgage, and then because you foreclose, because you can't pay the balloon payment or keep up on the payments, I foreclose on the home, and then as the bank, I take the home back. So I lend you the money to get the home, and then I take the home back from you when you don't pay it back. And then I have that home again to resell. So that's predatory lending. That occurs actually quite a bit even today. Often lenders know that you're going to struggle with payments and lend you always. Cars do this, right? When you see a young 20-year-old who doesn't have a great deal of money buy a very expensive car, that's predatory lending. They know that that individual is going to struggle to make those payments, but if that car is only going to lose so much value, they'll get a certain amount of them trying to pay on the car, and then they'll get the car back when they foreclose or they repossess the car. That's predatory lending. That's one aspect. The next aspect that became very problematic was called no document loans. And so bankers, mortgage lenders specifically, not all bankers, but mortgage lenders specifically, they started loaning people enough money to buy a house without making sure they had any income. And what we found is that many people bought a home with no income. They bought a home with no income. Neither of them had, right? If it's two individuals, they go and buy a home. Neither of them have a job. They can't make the very first payment. They make no payment whatsoever. But because they were able to offload this house, those individuals, the individuals who back the loan, they get some money for putting that loan out, for getting that sale, right? And the realtor gets a certain amount of money. Everyone involved in the selling and buying of the home is making money, but the individuals who buy the home and live in the home, they end up with a home that they can't possibly afford, and then eventually they foreclose. So the system was fine because if you bought a home for $300,000 because housing prices was going up, all of a sudden your house is worth $400,000. And then you refinance your home, or you sell that home, and even though you weren't making the payments, you use the money that you sold the home with to pay that off and sort of flipping houses. The problem is that homes were going up faster than wages, and eventually we knew as a bubble works, right, that eventually those house prices were going to go back down. And many people ended up stuck in a home where they bought it for $400,000, and then all of a sudden as the bubble bursts, it's only worth $200,000. And it's not a home that they can afford, right? They couldn't afford it at $200,000. They can't afford it at $400,000. So they're stuck with this very expensive home, and they can't sell it because they owe more than it's worth all of a sudden. And because they owe more than it's worth, they're just stuck in this home. And now the bank doesn't want it, right? It's a $400,000 debt, and it's only worth $200,000 to foreclose on it, which means it's not worth taking. And that's called being underwater, right? The bank doesn't want it. You can't get rid of it. You can't just sell it to get out from under that payment. You're underwater, but also the bank can't foreclose. And it puts this point where the bank has all of these loans that aren't going to get paid back. And then when you have those aspects, then that becomes toxic assets, and then the banks need a bailout, right? The banks have all of these loans out that aren't getting repaid, and they had overextended themselves, right? And overextended means the loans that they had put out is more than the assets they had, right? Significantly more. And so by 2015, there had been 5 million homes lost to foreclosure. Now, those homes get foreclosed upon, and then at some point someone buys a foreclosure sale. So some individual who didn't anticipate that, didn't involve themselves in that process, might find themselves able to buy a cheaper home than originally. But for most people, it means that they have to move into a housing market or a rental market. So rents go up because they get out of that. But a lot of people just don't have another option, right? So homelessness goes up, right? And then home ownership goes down for the first time between 2008 and 2012. It had been going up significantly over the last 100 years. It's the first time we have a dip in it. So we talked about, right, education. We talked about health. We talked about housing. But what we haven't talked about this idea is how do we identify deserving versus undeserving? Now, I'm talking about this theoretically. Now, you're going to notice a lot of these are going to have sort of racial undertones. And this is how the public as society looked at deserving versus undeserving in the past. As far as like whether or not we think individuals are deserving to get pandemic relief, that's not really a consideration, right? If you're sick, you deserve, right? If you're sick, then we need to do something about you having COVID. We need to isolate you. We need to figure something out. It's more universal. We did see that there was a claim. I don't think this is, there isn't very clear evidence, but there was more transmission among minority groups, right? But that doesn't mean they're spreading it. That means they're getting it. They're more likely to get it, not to spread it. But there is a concern that there's sort of racial undertones about that. But as far as like the pandemic goes, we sort of see it as a universal problem. Like we're all at risk of getting sick, and we're all need to stay home so we don't get others sick, right? That is part of it. So when we're talking about deserving, this is not as true for this pandemic, but we might see it moving forward. And when I say deserving, I'm not saying a normative aspect of this is something I believe. I'm saying this is why people think they're deserving or undeserving. And these are the arguments that have been made. Not that these arguments hold, but the arguments that have been made, right? So don't think that I'm trying to paint a picture where minorities are not deserving, right? This is an argument made by American society over the past 100 years. So the first part is that the elderly are always considered deserving and they are very organized, right? These are not separate, right? When you're organized, you're often considered very deserving. So the first thing is two of the biggest things that happen, two of the biggest programs that the elderly get are Social Security and Medicare. We call it pension, but pension and Social Security used to be heavily tied when companies gave pensions, but now Social Security is really the only protection, right? Very few companies give pensions today. The reason why they're considered deserving is because they have contributory programs. But the reason why they were designed as contributory programs and they're considered deserving is because of how organized they are, right? We talked about AARP. They have 38 million members. This AARP used to be their American Association of Retired People. They call themselves just AARP now, but it was supposed to be elderly people, retired people. They are 38 million members, organized, active, getting involved. The other thing is that they are 1/4 of all voters. Now, the elderly are not 1/4 of the population, right? We have a larger elderly population, but they're dying off, right? Remember that the life expectancy is average, right? So a lot of people die off. So the elderly are a small percentage of the population, but they're very overrepresented in voting. So one of the reasons we consider them deserving is because they're engaged. The other reason why we consider them deserving is it's sort of considered that they worked and got old and they sort of deserve it, right? That they worked through their life and now they're at a point where they've contributed to society and they deserve to have support because of they've been elderly, right? There's an assumption that you see an elderly person that they worked throughout their life and now they're sort of in their twilight years, sort of just they should be allowed to relax and get response from the programs they paid into. So they're considered deserving. The next is the middle and upper classes, and they are also considered deserving, but in a way that is problematic maybe in the language that we use for deserving. They are deeply organized. So one of the things about the middle and upper class is that they pay into taxes, right? That they pay taxes, they are providing wealth, they're providing jobs, right? This is why they're considered deserving in the American society. They are paying into taxes and they're paying into these things that help support other aspects. The reason why they're still getting the reason why they're perceived this way is many of the taxes or the tax breaks they get are sort of hidden in what's called a shadow welfare state. And the shadow welfare state comes from tax expenditures. And what I mean by tax expenditures is the government doesn't collect taxes on certain aspects of wealthy people because of what they paid into. So if you own a home, you're already better off than sort of most people, right? If you're a homeowner, you're a little better off than people in deep poverty, right? So being a homeowner already puts you in. One of the things to encourage home ownership that the American government has done is you get to deduct all the mortgage interest in your taxes, right? Any mortgage interest you pay, right, gets deducted from your taxes. And so that's not considered like a benefit you get, but it is a tax expenditure, which means by having a home, you pay less in taxes on your income. Right? By being a homeowner, you pay less in taxes, right? So if you're poor and you're a renter, you actually end up paying more in taxes because you don't get this tax expenditure of mortgage interest. And then Medicaid, right? Medicaid is typically for low income, right? That low income individuals get it. But if you can show that you have a need, if you're middle class, but you show have a need because you have multiple children or because you have provided something, then Medicaid might be provided to you. Low or no cost insurance might be provided to you in certain aspects. And so they are getting resources that are sort of hidden. Or, right, if you paid into Medicare, you can get a tax break on what you pay into Medicare, right? By having this, right, it creates a shadow welfare state where they're not really getting as much in benefits, but they're also not paying as much in taxes because of these tax expenditures that are provided to them. And again, a tax expenditure is just a way that the government doesn't collect taxes by allowing some sort of deduction for those individuals. So the next group is the working poor, and the working poor is considered very deserving but very unorganized. So these are individuals who work full-time jobs, and despite working full-time jobs, they still don't have enough money to pay for everything they need, right? And we know that they're deserving because they've been laws that have been passed that help them, right? The ACA, the Affordable Care Act, right, the Earned Income Tax Credit, and the Nutritional Assistance, right, program, right? Subsistence and Nutritional Assistance Program. So these programs help people provide the resources while they're working to get themselves to the next step. But they're not very organized, which means they're not working, right? Because they're not they're not organized in political life. Now, typically they're just working and trying to survive, and so they don't have a lot of time and energy to put towards political activity, but they don't give as many benefits, but they're still getting some benefits, and they deserve the benefits because they're spending their time working and their work is not providing them a livable income. And so there's a little recognition that if you're working really hard and you're still not making it through the day, that there should be some aspect of support for you. And the Earned Income Tax Credit saying you're working really hard and you're still not making enough, I'm going to give you a tax break, right? The same as the shadow welfare state where it's tax expenditure. And then the Affordable Care Act, right? If you work really hard, you should get insurance. And if your company isn't providing you insurance, right, there should be an option available to you. Now, when it comes to non-working poor, this is always considered undeserving. The problem with this is this is a group that could work, they're able-bodied, but it's not working. Now, they're unorganized in the sense that they just don't have time or the energy or the resources to be involved in politics. When we consider them undeserving, it's more about them not going to work and contributing in the formal economy. And, sorry, I want to have this up just in case. Okay. When we're talking about a formal economy, we're talking about you go to work and you get paid in dollars. Some individuals are in an informal economy. That's where they care for children. So one of the things that really happens to mothers, right, is more likely that women take care of children, not that fathers can't do this as well, right? But it's, statistically speaking, the majority of caretakers of children are female, is that they might be taking care of their children and therefore not getting paid. And this comes to the other group. The non-working poor is those who are undeserving. And we have to separate this to two categories, right? Are they not working in the formal economy, or are they not working, right? If they're just saying, I'm not going to work and you have to take care of me, right, then that's where that undeserving identity comes with. But some individuals are given this unfortunately. When we talk about undeserving, unorganized, right, there is this identity that resources should not be going to minorities, women, and children. Now, the first part is that if when we talk about the working poor, if you work a job and you need resources to help, then there's a limited amount of support, right? That maybe you need a little support. But typically what people argue is if you work a job that doesn't really provide for you, you should either go to school or you should get a better job. You should move your way out there. And what happens for minorities and women is their wages are typically lower, right? Not just to mention that females make 72% of what males make in the same jobs, but minority females make significantly less, right? Hispanic females make about 54% of what white males make in the same job. So if you have a white male and a minority Hispanic and a Hispanic female, right, the white male might be making almost double in the same job as the Hispanic female, right? That's a problematic issue that isn't really being addressed. And one of the arguments is that they're undeserving, right? That women don't work as hard. And this is not true. I'm not saying this, right? Or that they have to take longer gaps for pregnancy and having children, or that minorities combined with being female means that there's something where they don't provide as much or aren't capable, right? None of this is true, right? But it's what the American public sees about why they're undeserving. Now, the other part is that when you're a minority or a woman or a child, right, that there are longer periods where you can't find work, right? If you're a 16-year-old and someone says, well, if you're tired of not having food in your house, go get a job, it's hard for 16-year-olds to find employment, right? Now, depending on where they're at, right? Obviously, every case is different, but if you're a teenager, there are a lot of jobs you just can't do in this city, right? And because there are a lot of jobs that you can't do in the city, that's a big part of the economy here. Finding work and getting yourself working poor rather than just being unemployed or non-working poor is very difficult. The same is true for women, right? And the minority women especially. So it might take them longer to find employment if they're not able to find something that fits with their background. Now, I don't really talk about exploitation anywhere, but obviously there are a lot of jobs for women that are very exploitive in this community that maybe might be available but couldn't really be acceptable. So as much as I don't want to get into that, like, oh, you don't like your job, like there are very exploitive jobs, dramatically exploitive, that maybe would be possible, but without asking an individual to completely violate all of their morality or do something completely inappropriate to their society, right? That it's very difficult for most individuals in that grouping to find unemployment. And so why they can't find unemployment is the same reason why they're unorganized, right? If you don't have any money or resources, you don't want to go to a rally, you don't want to get involved politically, you're just trying to make it day to day. Now, the other part about this is what we call feminization of poverty. So the feminization of poverty is really just about going to work and the cost of you going to work and leaving your children. Now, I'm really talking about females who have children in this feminization of poverty. First, because females are more likely to be caretakers and females are more likely to be single parents, right? And part of this feminization of poverty is that if you go to work and you make minimum wage and then it costs you several $100s a week for someone to watch your children, you might actually have to spend more to get someone to watch your children than you make going to work, right? If you're a part-time worker and you make $8 an hour, but for someone to watch your two kids, it costs you $10 an hour, it's not worth it for you to go to work because you're losing $2 every hour you're at work, right? And that's not including the travel time and all the other aspects of going to work. So when we're talking about this, it becomes this really big problem about the informal economy, right? Am I providing a service by watching my children, by taking care of my children, by doing that otherwise I would be actually costing the society more money because I would need more help in sort of childcare. Now, obviously there's debates about that. We do see a lot of individuals talking about not having children if you can't afford them. We have sort of a weird value system, right, that people should be free to have children, right? There's a lot of pro-life movement in the society, but also that the government shouldn't be responsible for carrying their children once they're born, right? So we're talking about undeserving poor, and specifically we're talking about this feminization of poverty. It's where women say, I have two children, and maybe through no fault, right? Maybe they were in a relationship and they had a breadwinner, and There was an agreement between the two of them that they would be the caretaker of the children, they would be at home, right? And then all of a sudden that relationship ends, or that person is no longer willing to support them, or just leaves or dies or whatever, and then they're stuck in this. And we actually go back all the way to the beginning, right? We know that women used to be considered deserving poor, right? Because of this destitution thing, this idea that there aren't that many job opportunities and it's hard to go anywhere, and who watch your children when you go to work. And that seems to have been lost as we move to the 20th century, to where now it's this argument of why did you have children in the first place, right? So when you're talking about undeserving poor, there's these conceptions that exist that may or may not be true, but cause the public to treat minorities, women, and children as undeserving poor. So in this last slide, as we're moving forward, there has to be a discussion about, should the government just stop worrying about providing opportunity, and it should provide more equal conditions, right? This is really an argument that's being made, right? The Green New Deal, Democrats are really pushing for this, that it's not enough to say, I'm giving you all the opportunities you need. At some point, I need to provide you some conditions, right? Yang, who was running for president, talked about universal basic income. Maybe every American needs to just have $1,000 to cover their costs. Maybe that just needs to be a thing that exists. I'm not arguing this, Yang argued this, right? That $1,000 a month to just pay whatever your necessities are and make sure that no one is in poverty. Maybe equal conditions are there. Obviously, on the other side, right, there's a very strong argument from the Republicans that this is the wrong way to go, right? Republicans have argued that the Green New Deal is socialism in disguise, right? They're trying to make everyone equal, that everyone just has sort of a bare minimum, right? I'm not weighing in on this, I'm just giving you the sides of it, right? And when is this discussion about, are we providing opportunity, and is opportunity enough? Those are the difference in the future of welfare. We are probably going to see, especially that Biden has talked about a public option insurance, that at least when it comes to medical care, opportunity is no longer going to be the standard. That there is going to be some minimum medical standard that's going to be available, moving towards universal health care, right? That's likely to be the expectation. That's likely to occur in the next few years. Right, especially not universal healthcare, but a public option, and eventually universal healthcare moving down the line, right? Which is why Republicans argue so strong against it. They know we're moving towards universal healthcare, and they think that's wrong, right? And then on the left, right, they argue that this is a basic right, and then the right should be provided by the government. The other part is that the United States spends more on healthcare than any other advanced nation, right? We spend 17.5% of the economy. Health costs are very high. Right, we are seeing very high health costs and dramatically higher health costs now, right? That almost all of the medical institutions, all the hospitals, they are as strained as they possibly can be, and they're not going to recover overnight. And so more than likely, you will see more of our economy going towards medical care into the 20-25% range in the next few years. And so there probably will need to be a reassessment of how that's going to work, right? The most common reason for individuals to declare bankruptcy is medical bills. That's actually the most likely reason, right? Tied with divorce and other aspects, but typically medical bills are impossible for you to recover from, right? If any one of us were to get sick enough, right, we could be in thousands and thousands, tens of thousands of dollars debt depending on our insurance, and we wouldn't be able to repay it, and we would have to file bankruptcy. So those are one of those aspects that are really being dealt with about how do we deal with health coverage when we're spending more than any other country. We're actually spending a great deal more per person than other countries, and yet providing less insurance coverage. So that's an issue. The other aspect, which is actually less, is this graying of American society. That baby boomers are more and more reaching retirement age. They are actually, baby boomers are sort of, they've reached retirement age. And unfortunately, one of the outcomes of this is we will probably see, because it's more likely to kill an elderly person than a young person, that post-pandemic, we will actually see a dramatic decline in the elderly population, right? It's much more likely that between this and people dying because of the strain on the health system, the healthcare system has a strain, and that will lead to more deaths just because they don't have the resources to take care of everyone, that the elderly population will be dramatically impacted, and you'll see a dramatic increase in their population. And so for this grain of American society is no longer an issue. Millennials had less children, and Gen X had a little less children, millennials less children, but what we're seeing from that is that even though you're having less and less children, there hasn't been a generation that had lots of children. So there's no big generation that happened, right? Gen X was not a big multiple kid generation. It was 2 or 3 siblings at the most, right? So you have fewer and fewer large families. And so we're sort of dwindling to where the average female is having about 2 children. It's sort of stabilized population. So even though millennials had less children, it was just less relative to previous generations. And so even as Gen Z is sort of coming through and probably having less children, it'll be at the same rate as previous generations. And so you won't have one graying population. And after the pandemic, because the shrinkage of the elderly for all the health issues that they're facing, right, and all of the other medical issues that are coming alongside with this pandemic, right, that this graying issue that we thought we were coming into is no longer an issue. All right, so that is the end of chapter 17. It's so hard for me to tell how long the videos are. So I'm going to end this video, and then I'm going to make another video. My voice seems to be doing okay. I know we're leading into the afternoon, so don't feel like you have to watch these right now. I just want to get them all out because I do not know how well I'm going to be feeling tomorrow. So I am going to stop this video, and then I'm going to put up another video. I know I'm just sending out all of these live streams, and for those of you who are subscriptions and like getting notifications, don't feel like you have to watch every single one. Watch them at your own pace, and then I will be reaching out to some of you after Thanksgiving. I'm not going to communicate. Like, if you email me, I'll respond. But tomorrow is the day before Thanksgiving, and then going to Thanksgiving. I actually don't have Thanksgiving plans, but I want to give you those few days. This has been crazy. I don't know what you're deciding to do, right? And so I want to provide you with this sort of a window where you don't hear from me. So you won't hear anything from me Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, maybe over the weekend. But then come through Monday and Tuesday, sort of more communication about how to get through every step. So, okay. So thank you, and thank you for watching this video, and you should see another video soon.